Welcome to the Rocky Mountain AI Interest Group. The following video entitled AI Law and Entrepreneurship was recorded on August the 13th, 2025 on the CU Boulder East campus. Presentations were made by Harry Surden, Jason Lynch, and Otto Hanson and Evan Harris. Chapter markers are provided below in the description field for you to navigate to each of these presentations.
I'd like to introduce Harry Surden, who is our first speaker, professor of law at the University of Colorado Law School. And if that does not keep him busy enough, he is also the faculty director of CU's Silicon Flatirons AI initiative. By the way, as an aside, if anyone here has not checked out the Silicon Flatirons events at CU's law school, you're really missing out. They're always bringing in great talent from around the country to discuss the most pressing issues and topics at the intersection of law and technology, as well as celebrating local tech talent and innovation. And if that wasn't enough, Professor Surden also happens to be the Associate Director of Stanford University's Codex Center for Legal Informatics. He brings an incredibly valuable interdisciplinary perspective to his work, given his background is not just in the law, but also computer science. He received his bachelor's from Cornell, his law degree from Stanford. Prior to his legal clerkship and joining academia, he worked as a professional software engineer at both Cisco Systems and Bloomberg. So he truly is what I like to call the new Renaissance professional, that I think they are the folks that are able to cross boundaries in the business, the legal, the ethical, the sales world, dare I say, and talk to everybody. We'll talk more about that later. Tonight, Professor Surden is presenting opportunities and peril at the intersection of technology and access to justice. His discussion will highlight specific access to the shortcomings of justice in this country, the state of generative AI tools in the legal industry, and he will weigh the pros and cons of more widespread use of generative AI in connection with providing legal counsel to clients. So would you please help me welcome Professor Harry Surden.
So thank you, Phil, for that kind introduction, and thank you so much to Chris and to Dan and to Ken for having me here, and thank you to all of you. So as Phil said, I'm a professor at the University of Colorado Law School. I'm also associate director of Stanford University's Center for Legal Informatics, and I was a software engineer for many years, and I still program quite vigorously, although these days I guess it's more vibe coding where the AI is doing more of the heavy lifting than I am. So it's a real pleasure to be here. I've heard a lot about your group and all the interest, and this is my first time, but hopefully not my last. So today I'm going to talk about using AI by non-lawyers. So many of you I've seen are non-lawyers in the group, startups, business people. And the question is AI good enough for any or all of your legal needs? And the short answer, as I will talk about, is sometimes yes. I'm going to give you a principle for deciding when to use AI in lieu of a lawyer and when you should not use AI in lieu of a lawyer. But before we get to that, let me talk about the major problem this is aiming to solve. So we have a major access to justice problem in the United States. And what is the access to justice issue? Well, some of us know that in criminal law, there is something called the right to counsel, which means the government will appoint a lawyer for you if you cannot afford one. But criminal law is just a small part of law. The vast majority of law is civil law, which approximately speaking is everything that is not criminal. So think of family law, wills and trusts, medical malpractice, immigration law, all the IP law and regulatory law that you have to deal with. That's civil law. And there is no right to counsel, meaning the government will not give you a lawyer for your civil needs, even if you can't afford one. So there are a lot of people who cannot afford lawyers in family matters or immigration matters, things of that nature. So what do? Well, they have only a couple, usually not so great options. If they have this resource available, there are free attorneys run by nonprofits like Legal Aid, which are excellent, but under-resourced. But most of the time, people can't get access to those lawyers. So what they do is they either guess, they ask a friend or a community member, but mostly they're just guessing and doing their best for their landlord-tenant issue or their family matter. And as we all know, the law is way too complicated to simply guess if you're just not legally trained. It's complicated for me, and I'm a law professor, so imagine what somebody who has not gone to law school. So can AI help? And the answer is yes. Today's AI finally can do it. It couldn't a couple years ago, and now it definitely can, but only in a certain subset of cases, what I'm calling the sweet spot, and I'll delineate those principles. But the rest still require lawyers, so that's good news for you and good news for lawyers, and I think this kind of will keep going. So I don't think lawyers are going out of business for better or for worse, but also there's a new source of legal advice that wasn't there before for non-legally trained people that is actually reliable. Okay, so let's talk about, first of all, where we are today in AI, just to orient you. I know a lot of you are steeped in AI, but just to orient us, and I'm usually talking to lawyers who don't know anything about AI, not the AI interest group here. So you guys probably have a stronger background in this. But what we have are the frontier models, which are the leading models from the AI companies. OpenAI is ChatGPT, just came out with GPT-5 a couple days ago. Claude through Anthropic, they just came out with 4.1. And Gemini, 2.5 Pro. And maybe to a lesser extent, Grok is, in my opinion, actually pretty good. Then we have what's known as the open weights, or sometimes called the open source, but really open weights model. These are models released, and you can, in principle, download them and run them on your own computer, but often they're too big, many of them, to run on your own computer, so you have to run them in the cloud. But these are free in the sense that you can do what you want with them. And then in law, we have legally specialized models. Often these run on top of the frontier models, whether it's GPT or Claude, but they use a specialized legal database that are well curated from Westlaw and Lexis and other providers like Harvey. So I'll talk about those in a second. And then we also can divide the world up into general AI models, which are most of the ones that we're talking about here, and narrow or specialized AI models. Until recently, we didn't really have general AI models that work very well. Mostly in the past, we had narrow AI models that did things like fraud detection or spam detection, or were used in scientific research for very narrow classes of topics. So we're more interested in the big breakthrough are the general AI models that I'll talk about. So how did we get here today in AI? I won't go through this whole timeline really, but there's been a giant breakthrough since 2022. So I've been studying AI in law for 20 years. For the first 17 years, I said AI is interesting, but not very useful in law. The last 3 years, I've said, pay attention, it is now interesting. So there's a lot of hype in AI, but it is not just hype. There is real massive progress that has occurred, so I can assure you. So I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but there's a lot of skepticism in other foundations that it's only hype, and it's definitely not only just hype. AI today can do things that it could not do only 3 years ago. So, this is, GPT-4 from 2 years ago you can use it to write like a basic patent application, which it couldn't remotely do before. So prior to 2022, November 2022, which is the release of GPT 3.5, that was the huge breakthrough, which I won't go into the details, but I'm happy to go into the A&I in the Q&A. But the old AI models from early 2022 are still around. So you can ask them kind of silly questions, which as I said, I've been testing this for 20 years to see if they could reason, function. And as of early 2022, the leading state-of-the-art model, which was GPT-3, didn't display basic common sense reasoning. It would fail on questions that, like this, how many legs does an apple have? That a toddler would know the answer to, but AI models were routinely being fooled. And then starting with GPT 3.5 and GPT 4, we've had this massive explosion, what they call the natural language processing problem, understanding ordinary language, reasoning thing. That's definitely been cracked, and it was not cracked before. Now, as we all know, AI models are not perfect today, but they're much better, and they can engage in general purpose reasoning. And as I'll show you, they're getting better and better every year, approximately 10% improvement with the most recent round of models released this summer. So as you all know, they're called large language models because they're trained on large corpuses of words, or LLM. They have lots of parameters. And so the thing that is interesting and is the big breakthrough, I think, is the language model aspect in AI. So because they're trained on basically the entire internet and millions of books, and language is how our society passes information and knowledge from generation to generation and compounds verified knowledge, we've stored all of humanity's knowledge in text, most of it, or a lot of it, some percentage, in other modalities. And since AI has now been trained on a large portion of the text of humanity, and now knows just about everything there is to know, albeit imperfectly. But with the different techniques, with this basic approach, it's gotten better and better. And so because it was trained on language, and basically humans use language to talk about just about every topic, it has a pretty good sense of just about every single thing that's ever been discussed in human history. Again, not perfect, but that's what makes it a general system, and that's why it's become much more useful. It's the generality of it, driven by the language, and now, of course, it's being extended to other modalities, including video and sound and images. But I think the language was the key to its generality. So it's no exaggeration to say that GPT 3.5 in 2022 and the subsequent versions, GPT-4, GPT-4o, 03, now GPT-5, and also I'm lumping in there the competitors from Gemini and Claude. The frontier models are humongous breakthroughs in AI. Okay, so now we understand where we are with AI. How are we using AI within law? Well, before we get to that, let's talk about AI practice. So there's a lot of discussion. Is AI hitting a wall? In my research, I studied this carefully, is definitely not. What's going on is that it's compounding exponentially, in my view, and I have a bunch of tests, but exponentially it's a small percent. So it's not linear, meaning we're not adding 10% every year. We're compounding 10% upon 10%. So the gains are slow and incremental, but over a certain amount of time, that compounding effect becomes huge. So just in my view, and this is very approximately speaking, we had GPT-4, which is about 10% better than GPT 3.5, and then we had 4o, which is about 10% better than GPT-4, and now we have GPT-5, which is about 10% better than GPT-4 on a bunch of different benchmarks. But if you now compare the 3 models ago, GPT-5 to GPT 3.5, there's a huge leap. The leap is not apparent because we've been releasing incremental models all along. So we're comparing it to 03, GPT-5 to 03, and it's not a huge leap over that. So it's continuing to increase, and I expect it to increase, compounding 10% every year. So to avoid the hype, it's not increasing at 100% every year, or 150% with the AI companies would want you to believe. On the other hand, AI progress has not stopped, in my opinion, and I see no reason why it's going to stop. There's lots of huge developments and going on. I pay attention to the research that can easily sustain AI progress for 5 to 10 more years, and just the developments alone that I study. And I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A if you have a question. Okay, so let's talk about large language models in law. As I said, There's different ways to think about it. Who's using it? Are you a lawyer? Are you a government official making decisions about other people, a judge or a policeman or a regulator? Or are you an ordinary person like you and me trying to make decisions about our business, our life, our family? So I'm going to focus on the third, using AI for ordinary people in their ordinary matters, whether it's your startup or your life. And let's talk about this. So lawyers have sort of two main options. They can use the ordinary tools that are available to us, like GPT-5 or Claude 4.1 or Gemini Pro, or they also have specialized legal models, as I said, from Westlaw or Harvey or Counsel that they're used to using. You don't need those. They're good and they're slightly better in certain ways, but you don't need those. In my testing, and that's part of what I do for my research, GPT-5, Claude, and the frontier models, the open weights models are a little bit worse, so let's put those aside, perform pretty well on a certain class of of cases. So let's focus on that, because let me talk about what AI is pretty good at for lawyers first, and then I'll talk about in your life. So for lawyers, AI is quite good at summarizing legal documents and classifying and categorizing legal documents. It's pretty reliable at something called e-discovery, although not perfect, but humans are not perfect either, which is looking at basically in a case or a merger or some sort of thing, you're looking through lots of documents like emails, and you're looking for some problematic document like a smoking gun email or some sort of fraud or something like that. It's actually pretty good these days at finding that. It used to be junior lawyers sitting in a basement who were doing that, and the AI is better. It's somewhat reliable at legal research, getting better. And as we've all seen, it's pretty good at drafting legal documents, but by no means perfect, so don't trust it. So the mental model I tell lawyers is think of AI today as the best third-year law student in the best law school. No lawyer, or you shouldn't, take a draft from a third-year intern working from you and turn it into a judge or turn it into give it to a client. If you did, that would be malpractice, but that is what's going on. Some lawyers are getting sloppy and having GPT write a draft for them, and they're not double checking it. But of course, if an intern wrote a draft for you as a lawyer, you would double and triple check it. You'd find wrong cases, hallucinations that the law student made up, and you would correct them. So do the hard work. So think of AI as a tool. It's a thought partner. It's not a substitute for you. And this is the same for programming. I use it a lot in programming. It makes mistakes. It's incredibly useful. It helps me, but I think of it as a thought partner who's doing drafts, and I look over the drafts, and the drafts save me so much time. So the best law student in the world is going to save you time by giving you a draft. Just don't think of it as a final product. Okay, so AI for non-lawyers. We can roughly think of legal stuff out there, legal problems, as divided into easy cases and hard cases. So what's an easy case? An easy case is something that most lawyers know the answer to in their area, and they'd all agree with, and they could tell you that answer. There is a lot of them out there. If you go to a lawyer and you ask them an issue, not every legal case is hard for a lawyer, but it is hard for non-lawyers because it's, there's all this jargon, we don't really understand it. So an easy case is a case where there is a right answer. Lay people don't know the answer to it, but a lawyer would tell you the answer. Most lawyers would agree. AI is really reliable for easy cases these days. Something where there's low complexity, there is a right answer, it can go out and find it. So this might be something like, I have a dirty carpet and I moved out of my apartment and my landlord is withholding my deposit. Is that legal? And the answer is no, they can't do that because ordinary wear and tear, assuming you haven't wrecked anything, is they can't withhold it, right? So there's a bunch of things like that, but we don't know that, but the answer is out there. By contrast, there's hard cases. That's maybe like 60% of stuff. That's a lot of law out there where there's complexity, there's nuance, there's judgment. But lawyers, like to think everything's a hard case, but it's not, right? There's a lot of stuff out there. There's also another way to think about it. There's another dimension, which is low error cost or high error cost, right? And this is the decision significant if I get it wrong? Is this going to cause problems, right? So immigration issues, family law, these are high stakes, problematic stuff. But what's kind of low stakes stuff? So asking a basic landlord-tenant question, putting a lease into ChatGPT and say, is there anything strange about this? Or I should pay attention or help me understand it, right? These are things where you're getting understanding. It's helping you navigate things, but it's not giving you a complex answer. So the sweet spot are low error costs and easy cases, right? Things where there's a right answer and things where the consequences are low. And that's about 20% of stuff. That's pretty high in my estimation. There's a lot of stuff where there's a clearly easy case. Lawyers know the answer, but you might not know the answer. But the consequences are pretty low. AI can reliably do that today. So again, a good example is if you have, you're asking a basic question about a landlord withholding your deposit, or you're trying to figure out a deadline or understand the gist of a contract or things like that. But what you shouldn't use it for is if you're going to do a merger with another company, right? Those you still want to do, or regulatory compliance. You still want to get access from a lawyer. A lawyer can help you understand. GPT or the Frontier AI can help you understand better what's going on. But at the end of the day, I recommend you need a lawyer. And there's a good analogy in medicine. We've been dealing this for years, right? You don't run to the doctor every time you've got a cold or things like that, right? Those are low cost stakes. But if things starting to look serious, right, there's some weird condition that you're not recognizing. If you got a high fever or there are big warning signs, right, you recognize that as high cost and you have to go to the doctor. So like in medicine, GPT is actually pretty good for low stakes medical conditions that are not that complex. And you still want to go to the doctor if it's a serious life-threatening condition or there's nuance or complexities like treatment for a disease. Same analogy in law, right? You can recognize, we have to deal with this problem when things are low error costs and we can recognize it. It's difficult sometimes, so that's the big issue. It's hard for lay people to tell sometimes when things are low error costs and high error costs, but that's a problem we're coming to deal with. So I really think that modern AI can help with access to justice problems. There's a whole lot of issues out there where people have basic legal questions that they can't answer on their own, that GPT-5 or Claude or Gemini can reliably answer, and it's getting better, and it can really open up some of these big gaps to justice, and we've never seen this before in the history of law. The only way to get AI answers for legal cases in the past was to go to the lawyer, which many people couldn't afford or didn't have access to. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure presenting to you.
Next up is Jason Lynch, who has been a lawyer for more than 23 years and is the general counsel and chief operating officer of Boulder's own Foundry. Foundry is our hometown VC firm focused on early stage technology investments, including in companies focused on AI. As an aside, if you don't already know, Foundry was co-founded back in 2007 by Brad Feld, a name that many of you will recognize, especially tonight. Jason also serves as a commissioner on Colorado's Access to Justice Commission, and he has been appointed by the Colorado Supreme Court to serve on committees examining the implications of AI on legal practice and the operation of the courts. Jason's talk will examine the implications for the delivery of legal services of Gen AI and the rise of agentic AI. He will discuss the access to justice crisis in America and how AI tools may be a solution to that crisis, even though offering such tools to the public is currently unlawful. Jason, take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone,
Thank you. In my day job, I am Brad Feld's lawyer. I'm the general counsel of Foundry, and I will argue here tonight that I should be replaced, and he should no longer employ me in that role. Our history of regulating lawyers is curious. Notwithstanding our inheritance of the British legal system and the existence in England of a well-regulated professional legal guild in the 17th century, in colonial America, there were no restrictions on non-lawyers acting in legal matters. Anyone was allowed to do legal work. You could find throughout the colonies the good yeoman farmers of our mythic past conducting legal transactions and practicing law, as we know it today, in taverns. Taverns were where a lot of legal work got done. You didn't have to have training. You didn't have to have certification. You didn't have to have licensure to act as an attorney. In some places in the colonies, like Virginia, lawyers were actually banned from practicing their trade. In 1658, Virginia had a statute. No attorney could practice law. You could not plead in any court of judicature in this colony, nor could you give counsel in any cause. Don't try to make your trade as a lawyer in Virginia in the 17th century. By the 20th century, of course, the legal profession becomes heavily regulated. For most of the past century, non-lawyers have been excluded from legal work. All states have laws that prohibit the unauthorized practice of law. To do legal work, you need a license, which means going to law school, passing the bar exam, and being admitted to the bar of the state in which you want to practice. So in Colorado, as in virtually every state, non-lawyers cannot do things like give legal advice, prepare contracts or legal documents, or appear in court for another person. You can be prosecuted for doing that as a non-lawyer. But for our purposes tonight, I want to focus on one restriction in particular that stands out. It is unlawful in Colorado for non-lawyers to own or control a website, application, software, bot, or other technology that interactively offers or provides services involving the exercise of legal judgment. I ask you to consider, when my good friend Otto is giving his presentation next, how this may apply to the product his company is putting into the marketplace, and products that maybe some of you are considering putting into the marketplace. Now, I want to argue tonight that this ban should be removed on non-lawyers or non-lawyer AI bots from practicing law, and that we should just embrace the future and admit AI lawyers to the bar. Now, I suspect that's not a very controversial position in this room. But when I give versions of this talk to audiences of lawyers and judges, it is quite controversial to entertain the idea that AI can replace human lawyers altogether. As was mentioned, I am a member of Colorado's Access to Justice Commission, and we have working groups thinking about problems like this. And there are some members of my profession, some of whom sit on our courts, who think it is a category error to conceive that a non-human could give legal advice. And it's simply not conceivable. Now, I try to be provocative on this in the legal community because I think my profession, which is more susceptible to the impact of AI than many, is not constructively reckoning with AI. I believe many lawyers and judges today think that AI will simply provide tools to help lawyers do their jobs better. It will certainly do that. But I think AI asks fundamental questions about what the nature of legal work really is. And the legal profession needs to wrestle with that. So when I talk to lawyers and judges, I tell them that no longer will a person have to search for a competent lawyer in a relevant subject, assuming you can find someone in your community and can afford them, meet with that lawyer to describe your needs, receive analysis and advice from that lawyer about what to do, and have that lawyer take action on your behalf. Instead, a person will be able to simply log in to an online law firm run entirely by AI and will do all of those tasks for you instantaneously and do them for a fraction of the cost. Now, I'm just going to assert that. I know we have a long way to go, Professor Surden, before that technical reality may exist, but I believe what Professor Surden says to us about advancements. Much more is yet to come. And what is possible today, I think, is only a fraction of what will be possible. Here then are 3 points that I try to use to convince my colleagues in law that we should change the regulations that restrict the use of AI lawyers. Now, these overlap significantly with some of the things that Professor Surden has already said. But first, LLMs, large language models, already satisfy many of the demanding qualifications we put on new lawyers. Reuters recently reported that OpenAI's O3 model earned grades ranging from B to A+ on final law school exams given by the faculty at the University of Maryland Law School. Now, I can validate this from personal experience because for several years, I've co-taught a class at the law school here on venture capital law and finance. And last year, the professor I taught with gave our final exam to OpenAI's O4 model. It scored an A-. But perhaps most importantly, from the perspective of AI serving human clients and the existing regulatory framework purportedly designed to protect consumers from unskilled lawyers, LLMs can take and pass the bar exam. According to research reported by the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics, GPT-4 passed the uniform bar exam with an impressive score. Now, if LLMs can pass the bar exam, the primary tool we use to determine whether humans are competent to represent clients, why should we deny AI lawyers the ability to do so? Second, we can see that LLMs are capable of doing the actual work of lawyers. The work of lawyers includes the following things: counseling, advising, or assisting another in connection with that person's legal rights and duties, representing another person before any tribunal, or drafting pleadings or other papers for a person appearing before a tribunal, exercising legal judgment in preparing legal documents for another person. Now, Professor Surden mentioned some of the current capabilities, but I also would suggest that you go to his YouTube site, because he has some really wonderful examples there. And I think that evidence shows where AI in its infancy has yet still to go. So there, Professor Surden shows ChatGPT preparing a legal memo, applying tort law to an accident in a retail store. He shows GPT-4 accurately distilling a series of rules from the federal copyright statute and correctly applying those rules to different fact patterns. He shows GPT-4 drafting a motion to dismiss in federal court from a simple set of facts. This is the bread and butter work of lawyers. It is preparing pleadings, legal documents. It's providing legal judgment by offering conclusions after applying law to facts. Now, There are objections that LLMs are not ready, that their output is still too imprecise or error-prone. And it's true that we know of examples of hapless attorneys who used ChatGPT to draft legal papers and submitted those papers to courts without reviewing them. In those instances, ChatGPT hallucinated and created case law that didn't exist. This kind of thing should not persist for long, however. As Professor Surden mentioned, legal-specific AI tools are already being tested, deployed, and used by lawyers. They are based on verified case law, statutes, and regulations. Legal-specific AI can be fine-tuned to eliminate hallucinatory mistakes. And there's no need for us to wait for perfection. Indeed, human lawyers are not perfect. In 2022, Colorado's Office of Attorney Regulation Counsel, which is the body charged with the oversight and discipline of attorneys, received 3,740 calls or written requests to investigate lawyers. The office imposed numerous public censures, suspensions of licenses, probations, and disbarment of lawyers after investigating those complaints. To be an improvement over the service that clients can obtain today, the standard that an AI lawyer must meet is not perfection. It need only meet the basic standard of practice of a population of imperfect human lawyers. Third, and finally, we need to embrace AI lawyers because we have an access to justice crisis in our country. What is access to justice? We say that a person has access to justice when they are able to understand their rights under the law, to assert and protect those rights, and to get a fair result. By that definition, too many people in our country have little or no access to justice. So as I mentioned, I serve on the state's Access to Justice Commission, and 2 years ago, we released a report based on a statewide listening tour we conducted where we heard directly from Coloradans about their legal needs. We heard from individuals and families who regularly deal with important legal matters whose outcomes can have life-altering and profoundly destabilizing consequences. These matters include child custody, divorce, home eviction, protection from domestic violence, and access to essential government benefits. We've heard how often Coloradans face seemingly insurmountable obstacles when trying to deal with legal problems like those. According to a 2021 survey by the Institute for the Advancement of the American Legal System, 66% of Americans experienced at least one legal problem in the past 4 years, but only half of those people reported the problem being completely resolved. One of the biggest challenges we face is the lack of lawyers. Large portions of the country are legal deserts, where there are not enough human lawyers to serve people's needs. A 2020 study by the American Bar Association found that in 40% of counties in America, there was less than one lawyer per 1,000 people. The ABA study found that in 28 of Colorado's 64 counties, there were less than 10 lawyers total, and in some counties, there were none. Our legal system is what is called an adversarial system. Two sides to a legal matter fight, argue, and compete before a neutral arbitrator to determine an outcome. In our system, representation by a lawyer is essential to understanding one's rights, protecting and asserting those rights, and obtaining a fair outcome. Yet we have a persistent structural civil justice gap in this country, in significant part because a lawyer is not available. Even if you live in a place where there may be lawyers, the cost may be a barrier. The AI lawyer can be a solution to this crisis and help restore confidence in the rule of law. So what I wonder, and what I want my colleagues to wonder, is what justifies the exclusion of technology from providing legal services to the public? What is it, after all, that human lawyers do for their clients that AI tools cannot? We must wrestle with these questions now, even if one feels that AI is not quite ready to represent clients. The technology will advance. Because if we cannot identify an essential human element required for the practice of law, then by prohibiting AI from delivering legal services, we're depriving millions of Americans of access to justice. We're subverting fair resolution of legal disputes, and we are undermining the rule of law. Thank you.
I know many of you entrepreneurs and would-be entrepreneurs have been waiting just for this one. Otto Jansen, on my far left, and Evan Harris, on my near left, will present From Idea to Exit in 18 Months, How We Built and Sold Screens.ai, which was acquired by, as you may have heard, Agiloft. And they'll be talking about what does it actually take to build and sell a legal tech startup in today's AI-driven world. Otto Hanson is the founder of both TermScout and Screens.ai, following the acquisition of Screens in 2024. Otto is now overseeing the business unit at Agiloft. As Otto tells it, he started working in contracts as a corporate lawyer, but he quickly felt that there had to be more effective and efficient ways to do things. Legal contracts are the lifeblood of every business, but he is convinced that we're only in the first inning of optimizing how they get created, reviewed, approved, stored, and managed. Presenting along with Otto is Evan Harris, currently the Senior Director of Software Engineering at Agiloft. He's a software engineering leader with more than 10 years experience building machine learning-powered applications. And let me just repeat that Otto and Evan did want everyone here to know that they are hiring multiple software engineers across all seniority levels to help them build the next generation of legal AI. So please, if you are one of those people, come up and introduce yourself after tonight's event. Without further ado, Otto and Evan, thank you for coming.
Thanks so much, Phil. And what a pleasure to be in this room. Some fun history. I had the privilege of learning about our outdated IP laws in Harry Surden's IP class back at CU Law back in the day. And then I had the privilege of learning how to be a lawyer practicing law with Jason Lynch at Davis, Graham & Stubbs back in the day. So it's a real privilege to be here among these giants sharing the stage today and sharing our story with you guys. We're going to tell a little bit about a fun story, a recent chapter in our lives, taking a company from idea to acquisition in 18 months. Before we tell that story, though, we have to rewind the clock and back up just a little bit to this special moment in my life when I was fitting in like a glove as a corporate attorney. I didn't last long here, but what I did learn when I was practicing law is that contracts are the backbone of the modern economy. Virtually every transaction that every person and every business engages in comes with a contract. And what I learned is there's this odd paradox, which is that the more contracts there are, the less they get reviewed. And I learned this in a really interesting way when a client called me one day and he said, Otto, we just realized that our customers never read our contract. They always just click I accept without scrolling through the thing. And I was like, yeah, I know, dude, it's a crazy world, but we all do it, you know? And he says, yeah. So what I want you to do is rewrite that contract and make it as aggressive as humanly possible. I want you to make this contract so aggressive that no matter what goes wrong, our customers can never seek justice. And he starts going through this nefarious ideas, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. But it's actually totally rational, right? If and once you realize that your counterparty isn't reading your contract, you have every incentive to make that contract very, very one-sided. And when I zoomed out and looked at the contracts that I was working on for businesses of all sizes and shapes, I realized that that type of opportunism was not the exception, but the norm. That is the world that we live in today. We live in a world where there are so many contracts, and so many of them are very, very one-sided. And I thought, gosh, there's got to be a better way to do that. So, like any good entrepreneur, like any good entrepreneur, I went out and started a company called Term Scout. And our mission, our vision was to make the contracts of the world simple and easy to understand. We thought, gosh, if people could understand the contracts, that would balance the scales, that would incentivize people to make better contracts, that would make a lot of economic waste go away in this world. It felt like a really good cause. And we had a really great journey with Term Scout. We had some high highs. We raised some money, hired a CTO, a very, very talented CTO who's been working with me for 5 years now, who you'll hear from in a moment. We ultimately ended up raising $7 million and growing a pretty good business, and we had a lot of fun with this business. And we were building our own machine learning models, what Harry called, what were they? Narrow models. Yes, we were building a very narrow model for contract review specifically. And then in March of 2023, GPT 3.5 came out, ChatGPT came out with this new model, and as was stated in the previous talks, it reportedly passed the bar exam, and all of the technological moat that we had as a company vanished instantly. And it wasn't just that. I mean, we had plenty of other problems, don't get me wrong, but this was a moment for us that put us in a fairly tight spot. And like I said, it wasn't just that. We tripped and fell and miscalculated and misjudged and were burdened by bad luck and many other things. And then, shortly after GPT 3.5 came out, Evan had an idea.
Does this work? Can you guys hear me? Cool. So yeah, as I was wrestling with all the problems on the last slide and sitting in my basement about 40 miles south of here in Lakewood, my idea was to launch an entirely new company, tell all of our engineers to throw away what we'd been working on, tell our salespeople to stop selling what we'd been building, and basically take everything we learned about contracts while building a company and start from scratch in a natively Gen AI world. Basically, when you go from narrow models to general models, it changes a ton of things about the nature of the application that you're building. And for us, the right move was to start over. So I poured over a slide deck pitching an entirely new product, which ultimately became Screens. And this was Otto's immediate response. These are live Slack messages from us, where we basically realized this was the move, this was the right thing to do. But like good startup leaders, first we needed to validate it with customers. So when you're working on a startup, the most expensive way to figure out if customers want to buy what you're building is to build it. A much cheaper way is to ask them if they would buy what you're building before you build it. So we did that. We went through 10 customer interviews and we said, if we built this, would you buy it? And most importantly, can we hold you to that? This ultimately leads you to a moment of truth, the go, no-go decision where you're looking for some critical mass of those 10 customers to give you a signal. We're talking about doing this in a matter of weeks, not months, not years. So 10, is a small sample size, but it's what you have to work with. We were a go. And so we basically started with this idea from my basement in Lakewood in June. Just a couple of months later, we built an alpha version of the platform. A couple months after that, we went live with the beta. Just a couple months after that, we launched publicly. And critically in that period while we're building this thing, we actually learned an important thing about lawyers, which I think we already knew, but we really, really learned it, which was that they really, really like working in Microsoft Word. If you tell them to bring your contract to this other thing, this other platform, and it's going to render the text in its own way, and you're going to have to interact with it in this different way, they said, it's not going to work. I'm in Word, meet me where you are. So we launched a Word add-in. If you didn't know Word as a plugin ecosystem, this was new to us. Our team was afraid to build on top of, an ancient kind of Microsoft, situation. But we learned it and built it and launched that. And then things really started to take off from there. Otto, are we back to you?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So, things took off from the launch of the Word app. Those first few launches were, if anybody's ever launched a product, you've probably launched a bad product before, and those first few versions were a little bit like, oh gosh, I don't know if this is going to work. And that Word add-in, though, was night and day, and it really started to take off, and we got some pretty exciting traction, and we were all in that moment from March of 2024 up until the acquisition in December, all looking at each other like, oh my gosh, it's coming together. It's really starting to happen. It was a really fun time. And we sold to Agiloft in December of 2024. So that whole cycle took about 18 months. And it wasn't a crazy acquisition. Nobody's buying private islands off of this one, but we're proud of where it got. Your average SaaS multiple for publicly traded SaaS companies is like 5, 6, 7x multiple. Your average multiple for privately held high growth SaaS companies is like 8 to 12, 13x. We got a 30x multiple on revenue on the screens business, though admittedly it was a small business. Great multiple, good outcome, really, really proud of it. And the interesting thing about it is that we think that there's a repeatable play here. The big learning for us is that in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, so many companies are focused on go raise VC funds, grow at all costs, and look for the $100 million, $1 billion exit. And we think there's actually a really interesting play and opportunity to actually just bootstrap businesses, have a really laser focus on solving a unique problem, solving it well, and solving it fast, and at a good time. We happen to time this one particularly well. And we think there's a recipe or a formula that could be played there. So there is one key lesson when we look back in particular at the Term Scout version, which did okay, but got beat up a little bit more, and then the screens version that did a lot better. There's one thing that we look back on that we think was a really key, a key to success that we would like to share with you all. And that principle is this: pick 2 to 3 differentiators and borrow everything else. And I mean everything else. So let's unpack that a little bit. First, let's talk about picking 2 to 3 differentiators. And as we do this, we'll go ahead and take a look at the screens product. So I'm going to jump in. Oh, before I do that, the key to these differentiators, this is probably obvious to most, but ideally, these differentiators focus on a unique insight that you have into the market. Since I had practiced law and suffered from the problems that we were solving, I had some unique insights, especially since we'd been running a business and talking to lots and lots and lots of customers over the previous years. And obviously, these differentiators need to be things that you can win on, things that you and your team can actually execute on. So for screens, what that looked like was we picked 2 differentiators. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the screens product. So this is the Microsoft Word add-in, and this is a view of applying a playbook to a contract. So lawyers, this tool is primarily built for lawyers, and the idea is that a lawyer opens up the Microsoft Word add-in, and they run a playbook, and it tells them which of their standards are and are not met in a particular contract. You can do a lot of cool things, like if your standards aren't met, redline them automatically, add comments, lots of cool, nifty stuff for lawyers to use to speed up their time. None of that is particularly novel. There are actually a number of companies doing this now. The novelties for us are twofold. The 2 things we decided to focus on are network effects elements. The first is community screens. So we went out and talked to a lot of lawyers and learned that every lawyer has their own unique things that they need to be met, unique requirements in contracts. But they're always interested in what other lawyers think too, right? And so are we people. So the community component is basically we went out to lots of third-party experts and asked if they would publish their own playbooks. So this is a technology contract. If I go into the community, I can see I've published one, but a number of other experts have published these. This guy, a VP at a big alternative legal service provider, has published one called Lower Value Purchases for SaaS Contracts, which is what this happens to be. I can read about his playbook or screen here, and I can run this screen and essentially get this expert's opinion on my contract. So that's part 1 is community content. The second differentiator that we decided to double down on and focus on is market data. So we said it's one thing to be able to get an expert's opinion on your contract. It's another thing to be able to contextualize that expert's opinion with real data about what's actually happening in the market. And I hate to pick on this expert, but what we see when we run his playbook on this particular contract, if we go and look at all of the failed standards in this contract, we can see that he has a number of standards that he says should be met in this particular type of contract. But we can also see that the fact that these standards are not met is actually market across this type of contract. And we can see that that's true across 1,800 similar contracts in this particular case. So we're giving our users, one, an expert's opinion with a few clicks of the mouse on this particular contract, and two, market data. And those are two particular pieces that no one else does that happen to be pretty valuable both to customers, but especially valuable to Agiloft when we went to get acquired. Okay, so that's the first part of our advice or key principle. And I'm going to hand it over to Evan to talk about the other half of the equation.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and the second is to borrow everything else. So basically, whatever you're not differentiating on, don't innovate on. You don't want to spend time building non-differentiated software or solving non-differentiated problems, especially in 2025, in the world of cloud, in the world of there being a SaaS for everything from handling authentication to payments to hosting your application. These are not things you want to spend time innovating on. So that's where this principle comes from, to borrow everything else. The key component here, I say this like almost all the time at work when making arguments about what we should use or what we should do or thinking about hiring people, and that's to use modern popular tech. When you're picking a cloud provider, pick the most popular. When you're there's a reason that OpenAI is in the last talk as the kind of quintessential AI provider. If you want to pick an API for an LLM, probably pick the most popular one. Or things like payments for your app. Stripe is there, it works. They charge a fee. There might be a problem at scale, but that's a problem for later. You're trying to get your app up, you're trying to get it in front of customers, and you're trying to focus on the things you really do differentiate on. And also to look around at other companies and see how they solve problems. How are your competitors thinking about go-to-market motions like free trials, or what does their pricing and packaging look like? These are all things that you don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel on. I think like sales is a classic thing that people try to reinvent the wheel on when what you want to be doing is differentiating on your product in ways that are unique and using tried and true methods for everything else. It's me, yeah? Cool. So what are we doing now? These things. We're really growing our dev team and taking on big, ambitious goals to expand. Kind of what you saw was just a kind of a small part of the larger ecosystem of products that we're building. But as the kind of agentic world comes into focus, as newer models are coming out and allowing for more applied capabilities, we're working on attacking a big vision that's been the same since Otto's first slide here, pretty much, of making the world's contracts simpler and easier to understand. We think this is a big, important problem. We think cutting friction, especially in commercial contracts, there's a lot of deadweight loss in the world that has economic value to everyone, if people understand what's in their contracts in a faster, simpler, easier way, with the theme of tonight, in a more accessible way to a larger audience. So, like we've said a couple times tonight, we are hiring developers. If you are excited about joining in this vision, building something big with an ambitious team that likes to have fun, build great software, put it in the hands of customers and help make their lives easier and help them make them better at their jobs, we think it's a fun team. Agiloft's a globally distributed company and is fully remote, but we love Colorado. We have a strong presence here and a lot of our teams in Colorado. So if that speaks to you, please get in touch with me. My email address is here. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I think that's it. Thanks, everyone.